No bills have been introduced, so the House now comes to questions for oral answer. And the first question stands in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for the Government Communications Security Bureau and asks, does he consider that he should have been informed about the unlawful bugging of Kim Dotcom earlier than Monday, the 17th of September 2012? If not, why not?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no. I was informed by the Director of GCSB on September the 17th, which was the first day I was in Wellington following travel to Russia and Japan, and the first opportunity I had to meet with the Director in a secure environment once he had confirmed that it's likely an unlawful activity had taken place.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it his understanding that the bugging was unlawful because Mr. Kim Dotcom is a resident of New Zealand?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not in a position to go through what the particular issues are. I can say that the law is quite clear in one regard about what sort of individual can have action taken against them, and in the fullness of time, hopefully by the end of this week, Justice Naser's report will be available for people to be able to read.
Point of order, Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Am I to understand that the Minister is using a public interest defence for not answering the question?
Well, Order. I think the Prime Minister answered the question, but he said he's not in a position to answer it. And I think that's one's got to take a minister at their word, and that's a pretty honest response to a question if they're not today in a position to answer it. And I think the Prime Minister's indicated by the end of the week information should be to hand that will enable some of these answers to be available. But that's not, the House does have to take the Minister at his word. If he says he's not in a position to answer it, then he's not in a position to answer it. Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has already gone public saying that it was unlawful. What he's being asked today is to further detail that on the nature of the unlawfulness not being discovered, namely that he was a resident. But he's already been publicly out there and numerous media outlets having said that the action was unlawful. That's why he sought the inquiry.
Third order, that's not a, well, I'll hear from the Prime Minister, but that's not actually a point of order from the House.
Check, but I'm not entirely sure. I have actually said that. I've said it's likely to be unlawful, and as I've said, we'll be in a better position to understand the reasons if that's the case later.
Order, this is the trouble we get into, and I allow a point to be heard that is not a point of order. We're now getting into debate over the Prime Minister's answer, and it always leads to difficulty. Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the widespread media coverage that suggests the reason it was unlawful was because Mr. Dotcom is a New Zealand resident, is he seriously trying to tell the House that the GCSB were unaware that Mr. Kim Dotcom is a New Zealand resident when it has been in every media outlet in the country, and Mr. Dotcom organised a $500,000 fireworks display to celebrate him getting his residency?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, the fireworks is an irrelevance, but the memorandum has been released by the court today. The memorandum has been released by the court today. That may help the member get some understanding of the issue. But as I said to him earlier, in the early answer to the question, I'd be cautious about jumping to conclusions until the member has a chance to read Justice Naser's report, which I myself have not read.
Supplementary.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, referring to the memo release from the court, which says that the GCSB sought an assurance from the Organised and Financial Crime Agency of New Zealand as to the fact that Mr. Kim Dotcom was not a resident of New Zealand or a citizen, is he seriously trying to tell New Zealand that the GCSB, the organisation whose job it is to acquire information, could not find out that Mr. Kim Dotcom is a New Zealand resident, given that it was in every newspaper in the country and Mr. Kim Dotcom had a fireworks display to celebrate his residency?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the issue at heart is about the legality or otherwise of the position, and as the memorandum says, assurances were given about that legality. But Justice Naser's report, I'm sure, will give us rationale behind why that assurance was given.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has just said, has referred to the memo, and he's now allowed us to...
Order, what's the issue of order?
So the issue of order...
I'll let the member explain his issue of order.
The issue of order is around the Prime Minister's refusal to answer the first supplementary. He has now referred explicitly to the issue at concern that he refused to answer the question about.
The member should think the question he asked. The question he asked, from my recollection, is the Prime Minister trying to say to New Zealand that the GCSB did not know certain information. The Prime Minister in answer has explained that the GCSB did have certain information, the detail of which is not fully available yet, and when it is available, from my understanding the Prime Minister's answer, that will be made public. But the member's question was one where there was no particular answer. When his question asked, is he trying to tell New Zealand, what the Prime Minister's answer is what he is trying to tell New Zealand, that in fact there are legal issues and they're a little more complex than that, and that is a perfectly proper answer. Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister accept that the court documents to which he referred in his earlier answers state very clearly that the GCSB sought assurances from police that Kim Dotcom and his co-accused were foreign nationals, and hence it was lawful for the GCSB to spy on them, and hence the issue at concern was whether Mr. Kim Dotcom was a New Zealand citizen or resident?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I accept that's what the memorandum says, yes.
Dr. Russel.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister hence come to the conclusion that either the GCSB were incompetent in not checking whether Mr. Kim Dotcom was a New Zealand citizen or resident, or they misled the responsible minister because they did not tell him much earlier that they had acted unlawfully? Is it incompetence or did they mislead him?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I believe neither of those assertions to be correct.
Thank you, Mr.
Dr. Russel
Speaker.
Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can the Prime Minister argue that neither of those assertions are correct when either the GCSB, the agency responsible for collecting information, did not realise that Kim Dotcom was a New Zealand resident in spite of all the information? That's one option. Either they're incompetent or they did not tell the responsible minister that they had acted unlawfully. What is the third option?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The third option is the NASA report. The member is jumping to conclusions without all of the information. He's joining dots that actually can't be joined.
Question number 2, John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What measures has the government taken